For 3 seasons, Nolan Grayson was the standard, the benchmark every other Viltrumite on Earth got measured against, the most powerful hero on the planet, the man even Cecil walks carefully around. Then Conquest landed and the show quietly suggested that Nolan might not even be the strongest Viltrumite in the room anymore. Today we're going to break down the truth. Was Omni-Man stronger than Conquest? One line from Cecil changed everything. His analysts think Conquest would take Nolan down, and since then, the fandom has treated that line as a settled verdict. Conquest is stronger. Case closed. It's not that simple. The show has given us more evidence than most people have gone back to look at, and when you lay it all out, the answer to who's stronger is not what Cecil's team believed, and it changes depending on when in the story you're asking. Start with the age gap, because it's the most important and least discussed piece of this. Nolan says in season 4 that he's nearly 1,000 years old. That's confirmed by the show directly. Conquest was born during the Argyle era, which puts him at over 5,000 years old. That's not a rounding error. That's 4,000 additional years of Viltrumite biology doing what Viltrumite biology does, rebuilding stronger after every injury, upgrading the baseline after every fight, stacking physical power across a timeline that makes Nolan look like he just started. Viltrumites don't just age, they grow with age. Every serious fight they survive is a biological upgrade. Every near-death experience pushes what their body can do higher. 1,000 years of that produces Nolan. 5,000 years of that produces something measurably beyond what Nolan is. The age argument for Conquest is real. It's grounded in the mechanics the show builds into its universe, and anyone who dismisses it is skipping the most important variable in the comparison. But here's the complication with that. The Scourge virus didn't just kill 99.9% of the Viltrumite population. It weakened the survivors. Their invulnerability dropped, their healing slowed, their strength dialed back from wherever their peak had been before the pods hit. Every survivor came out of it running at a reduced capacity, and every survivor came out weaker than they went in. A window that, for Conquest specifically, cost him more than anyone else in the Empire. During that period of reduced strength, Conquest went to the Savage Planet and got attacked by Ragnar. These are feral creatures whose claws and teeth can pierce Viltrumite skin, one of the only naturally occurring organisms in the known universe that can do that. They tore off his right arm and destroyed his right eye permanently. He got a cybernetic replacement for the arm. The eye never came back. The Conquest that lands on Earth in season 3 has been carrying those injuries for thousands of years because the Scourge virus put him in a position where he couldn't survive the fight at full capacity. Now compare that directly to Nolan's Ragnar encounter. In season 4, Nolan goes to the Savage Planet and faces the same creatures that dismembered Conquest. He holds his own, he fends them off alongside Alan, and while the Ragnar keep coming and push both of them, Nolan doesn't lose any limbs. He walks away intact. The show puts these two encounters in front of you deliberately. Conquest at weakened post-virus capacity lost his arm and eye to the Ragnar. Nolan at his standard operating level held against the same creatures. You can argue the circumstances were different, that Conquest was fighting alone deeper into the planet, that the timing of when in the virus recovery each encounter happened matters. Those are fair points. But the show chose to show you both fights. It didn't have to. The fact that it did is telling you something. That comparison gets skipped constantly in this debate, and it's probably the single most concrete piece of evidence the show gives you on this question outside of the season 4 fight itself. So you've got Conquest with the age advantage, which is real, and Conquest with a permanent ceiling reduction from injuries he sustained while the virus had him running depleted. You've got Nolan, who's younger by thousands of years, but who's been intact throughout. No permanent damage, no limbs replaced with cybernetics, no biological legacy from a period of catastrophic weakness. The question of who's stronger in the present isn't just about who's had more time, it's about whose biology is performing at a higher level right now. Then there's what Cecil says versus what people remember him saying. The quote people cite is usually something like, Conquest is stronger than Nolan. That's That's not what Cecil says. His exact line is, "Our guys think he would even take Nolan down." That's a GDA analyst assessment based on observed data, hedged by the word think, and it comes from a team that's working with incomplete information about what Nolan can do. The GDA scanned Conquest when they had him. They've had 20 years of Nolan operating as Omni-Man on Earth, but they don't know everything. They weren't there when Nolan went into the Flaxen dimension alone and wiped out their entire army. That fight didn't make the Earth news briefing. It didn't go into Cecil's database. Cecil's team ran their comparison without knowing Nolan's ceiling, just what he'd shown while playing a long game infiltration mission on a planet he was supposed to be softening, not demonstrating his real capacity on. Think about what Cecil's team had access to when they ran that comparison. They scanned Conquest thoroughly during his time in GDA custody. They had that data. For Nolan, they had 20 years of Omni-Man operating on Earth, which sounds like a lot until you remember what Nolan was doing during those 20 years. He wasn't fighting at full capacity. He was running an infiltration mission. He was holding back constantly, doing exactly what Earth's greatest hero would do without ever showing anyone what he could do when the mission required something more. The Flaxen dimension is the example that breaks the comparison. Nolan flew into another dimension alone and destroyed an entire army, not a squad, an army. The Flaxens had been attacking Earth repeatedly, aging anyone they came into contact with by decades and seconds. Their military was advanced enough to build dimensional portals and field-organized combat units. Nolan walked into their world, tore through their entire force, and flew back out. It took him minutes. That wasn't a measured response. That was Nolan removing a problem as efficiently as possible, and nobody on Earth saw it happen. Cecil didn't know about it. It didn't go into the database. The analysts who concluded Conquest would beat Nolan ran their numbers without knowing that version of Nolan existed. That doesn't make Cecil wrong to trust his team's assessment. It makes the assessment incomplete, and basing the entire debate on an incomplete read from people who didn't have the full picture is how the fandom ended up with a consensus that the show itself keeps quietly pushing back against. What the show gives us as hard evidence something that happened on screen is the season 4 clash. Conquest grabs Nolan from behind during his second fight with Mark. They get into it. Neither one walks away with a decisive advantage. And then Conquest, a being whose entire identity is built on being the most dangerous thing in any room he enters, looks at Nolan and tells him he's almost as strong as him. Almost. Before we get to that, it's worth looking at what Conquest's fight with Mark tells us about where his ceiling sits. Conquest destroyed Mark in their first encounter in season 3. Not competed with him, destroyed him. He was playing the entire time, absorbing punishment, provoking Mark to fight harder, treating the whole thing as entertainment. Mark at that point was fresh off the Angstrom Levy fight and was already well beyond where he started in season 1. Conquest handled him like a warm-up. Then in season 4, the rematch happens. This time, Mark is stronger, sharper, and fighting with everything he has from the start. Conquest still wins the exchange, but he's not playing anymore. He's working. The difference between how Conquest fought in season 3 and how he's fighting in season 4 tells you something about what it takes to make him serious. Mark at his season 4 level is finally pushing Conquest into a real fight rather than a performance. That context matters when Nolan enters the same frame. That word is doing everything in that sentence. Think about who Conquest is and what his entire existence is built around. He's been the most dangerous thing in every room he's walked into for 5,000 years. He begged on his knees in front of Thrag after failing a mission, which tells you exactly how he processes the hierarchy of power. He treated Mark, who at that point had survived Angstrom Levy's multiverse war and was already one of Earth's strongest defenders, like an interesting toy. He tried to rip Oliver in half while barely paying attention. He drove his fist through Eve's body because she was an inconvenience he needed to take care of. A being with that track record and that self-image doesn't hand out compliments. He doesn't acknowledge strength in others unless he has no choice. When Conquest looks at Nolan after their season 4 exchange and says, "almost as strong as me," he's telling you something he would never say voluntarily unless the fight required him to. He felt it. Nolan made him feel it. Almost means Conquest thinks he's still ahead, but only slightly. That's a completely different picture from what Cecil's analysts believed. Now set the raw power argument aside for a minute and look at the fighting style question, because it's the part of this comparison that never gets enough attention. Conquest's whole approach to a fight is built on one idea: absorb whatever the opponent throws throws, demonstrate that it doesn't matter, and then dismantle them from a position of complete psychological dominance. He's been doing this for 5,000 years, and it works because against every opponent he's faced, that part of the fight was real. They hit him, and he didn't go down, they kept hitting him, and he still didn't go down. And by the time they ran out of ideas or ran out of will, Conquest started fighting back, and it was over fast. The problem with that is Nolan doesn't let it happen. The Chicago fight tells you everything about how Nolan fights when he's going for it. He puts Mark through a building, then a mountain, then a subway car full of civilians. He doesn't stop to gauge the reaction. He doesn't perform. He's working through a checklist of things that need to happen to end the fight, and he moves to the next one without pausing. He's efficient in a way that Conquest, across 5,000 years of warfare, never had to learn to be, because Conquest never fought anyone who made efficiency necessary. Every opponent Conquest faced broke before he had to go all out. None of them ever made him fight clean from the beginning. Nolan would make him fight clean from the beginning. Nolan fighting him the way Nolan fought Mark in Chicago, straight through, no pauses, no games, forces Conquest to improvise. He'd still be dangerous. The experience and raw power don't disappear. But improvising against Nolan specifically, a man who's been fighting since before most of Earth's recorded history, is not somewhere you want to be. There's also Nolan's lineage, which the show introduces in season 4 and which most people haven't fully processed here. Nolan's father was Emperor Argal, the ruler of the Viltrumite Empire. Argal was one of the oldest and most powerful Viltrumites who ever existed. Nolan carries that bloodline directly. This matters beyond the politics. The reason Thrag was bred specifically to be the strongest Viltrumite is that the Empire needed someone who could fill the gap left by Argal's death. Argal sat at the top of the Viltrumite power ranking for his entire life. The bloodline that produced him and that Nolan carries isn't just a claim to a throne, it's a genetic line that the Empire's own history treated as the standard for what a Viltrumite could be at their peak. It's why Thrag spent thousands of years trying to keep it hidden. Whoever could claim descent from Argal had a legitimate right to rule that superseded Thrag's own position. Thrag, who was bred specifically to be the strongest Viltrumite alive, who built his entire identity around that status, was afraid of what Nolan's bloodline represented. Thrag's own assessment of Nolan, when he has to give one, acknowledges that Nolan is the most qualified Viltrumite to rule behind Thrag himself, not Conquest, Nolan. The being who was bred specifically to be the strongest Viltrumite alive, who spent thousands of years building the case that he was the rightful leader of the Empire, looked at the full roster of surviving Viltrumites and identified Nolan as the one closest to his level. That's Thrag, who has every reason to minimize Nolan's standing, telling you who he thinks is dangerous. He doesn't name Conquest. He names the son of Argal, and Thrag's instincts about power are the sharpest in the Empire. He didn't get to where he is by misjudging threats. And then there's Ryan Ottley, the co-creator and main artist of Invincible, who was asked on social media who wins between Nolan and Conquest in the show's continuity. He responded with an image of Nolan. No hedging. No, it depends. Just Nolan. That matters more than a random fan opinion because Ottley isn't guessing. He drew every major fight in the comic run. He knows exactly what both characters can do at their ceiling and what Robert Kirkman's intention was when he wrote each of them. When the person with that level of first-hand knowledge gives you a clean answer, it carries weight. The show keeps circling the answer without saying it outright. Ottley just said it. So here's where it all lands. When Conquest arrives in Season 3, the gap is probably real but narrow. Conquest's age advantage, even after the Scourge virus and the Ragnar injuries, likely gives him a raw power edge over Season 3 Nolan. He's had 5 times as long to accumulate the biological upgrades that come with Viltrumite aging. The almost in that Season 4 line represents a genuine lead he held at some point in their relative development, and his willingness to be completely brutal the moment he decides to stop playing would be a problem for someone who tends to think during a fight. That said, the gap in Season 3 is not what the fandom treats it as. Cecil's line gets quoted as if it's a settled fact with a clear margin. The show never gives you a clear margin. What it gives you is one analyst's read based on partial data and a fight in Season 3 where Conquest plays with Mark for most of it before things escalate. You don't see Conquest's full ceiling in Season 3, you see him performing. The Nolan comparison we get on screen comes later, by which point the picture has already shifted, but at the point in Season season 4 where they clash, the gap has closed. The Nolan who went through the Coalition prison, the near execution, the Viltrumite war, who helped destroy Viltrum itself and then survived Thrag impaling him through the chest, has nothing in common physically with the Nolan who was on Earth teaching Mark to fly. Every near-death experience is a biological upgrade. He's been through more of them in less time than Conquest managed across thousands of years because the missions Conquest ran were ones he dominated from the start. Nolan's recent history is all near misses he survived. That's how Viltrumite biology works. Conquest's advantage is age, Nolan's advantage is that his recent history is exactly the kind of back-to-back brutal fights that upgrade Viltrumite biology fastest. So which one is stronger? In season 3, who'd spent 20 years holding back on Earth, the almost was real at that point. By season 4, it had closed. The Nolan who survived Coalition prison, the Viltrumite war, and Thrag driving a fist through his chest is a different person from the one who was teaching Mark to fly. Every near-miss upgrades Viltrumite biology. Conquest's recent history is missions he dominated from the start. Nolan's recent history is surviving things that should have ended him. That's the kind of pressure that moves the needle fastest, and Nolan has been through more of it in the last few years than Conquest has managed across thousands. There's also the permanent damage to think about. Conquest has been missing an arm since the Scourge virus era. The cybernetic replacement works, but it's not the same as the original limb. Every Viltrumite who survived the virus came out running below their pre-virus peak, and Conquest came out with a physical modification on top of that. Nolan came out of his own recent near-deaths intact. Beaten, yes. Impaled, yes, but whole. That distinction compounds over time, and over the timescale this comparison operates on, compounding matters. When you add the lineage, the way he fights, and the permanent ceiling Conquest has carried since the Ragnar took his arm, the answer is Nolan. Ryan Ottley confirmed it, the show's evidence points to it, and Conquest basically said so himself, not by a huge gap, this isn't Thrag territory, but Nolan, in the state he's in by season 4, edges out the version of Conquest the show gives us. The conversation about where Thrag fits above both of them is a different conversation entirely. That comparison changes everything. Subscribe now to be here when we get into it.